All right, well, welcome everybody. So today, my goal was, I just see people are so stressed out. I've definitely had my share of being stressed out. And so I've been doing a lot of research, and I was sharing some of it with friends of mine, and they were encouraging me to share it with more people. So that's why I'm doing this. And so COVID is a big topic. It's an emotional topic. There's a lot of fear, obviously. I feel like some of it is legitimate, and I feel like some of it is blown out of proportion. I think it's important to find a balance of taking this pandemic, seriously enough to protect human life, but to not make ourselves more miserable, for no reason. So I want to try to help mitigate that. There are a few of you who don't know me. So my name is Dr. Tracy Potter. I'm the PhD kind of doctor, not the MD practitioner kind of doctor or DO. And what I practice is something called functional lifestyle medicine. So that means that I use a functional medicine approach to help people address the root causes of their illness through lifestyle changes. And this all started when my mom got Crohn's disease and they wanted to take her colon out. And we decided we didn't like that idea, and we were able to get her in remission, and she has been since 2004. And that happened while I was in grad school doing my doctorate. And that redirected my life a lot. I also had a lot of my own health problems. I'll spare you all the details. Like I lost a bunch of weight, and some of you actually knew me when I was a little bit chunky. And, and I've just had toxic mold illness and anxiety and digestive issues and a lot of things I've had to work through. And so I learned to think like a health detective. And so when I approach COVID, this whole, I come from like a medical anthropology background. I come from a functional medicine orientation, and I like to look at from the micro to the macro. I like to look all the way down to like, microbiology, which isn't really my strong suit. I talk to experts to get insight on that. And then I like to zoom out and look on a societal level and even on a planetary level. I like to look at our connection to nature. That's what I think is really important. So what I've learned in helping people get themselves into remission from a lot of supposedly incurable conditions, which is my reality, and I'm so proud of the people that I work with that they're able to do this, is what I've really noticed is we're living in ways that don't work with our evolutionary biology. And so it's creating a lot of illness, ranging from chronic illness to epidemics, things like that. So that's going to be part of my perspective today. And so I recently rebranded my business as Inner Genius Health. And that inner genius I'm talking about is the genius of nature that's in our cells, that's in our DNA, that's in our atoms, that connects everything that exists. And so I want to look at the pandemic from that point of view. And I feel like when we look at how everything's connected and from a broader perspective, we're able to, I think, get an orientation that's less fearful and stressful, but also well-informed, so we really can, take it as seriously as we need to. So I want to start out with, I think so much of the suffering that's happening during the pandemic, there's been, horrible, like people have been very sick. People have died, lost loved ones. I mean, people have suffered, there's been economic injury across the board. Some people have really done well financially through this, but a lot of people have really suffered. And so I don't want to downplay people's struggles or dismiss people's suffering. That's like the last thing on the planet I want to do. But what I do want to do is not add more gasoline to the fire of mental and emotional suffering, or add gasoline to the fire of health problems, which is happening during this pandemic. So there's something called cognitive reframing, where you take away you're looking at something and see if it's even true, and try to maybe find a better feeling or more productive way of looking at it. And so that's kind of the approach I'm taking. I do that a lot with clients, but it's also the approach I'm taking today. And I think I'm going to start out talking about our brain states and our emotional intelligence. And so our brains on fear, I think, a lot of you may already be familiar, with we have a layered brain. We have like the brain stem that's very primal. It's very basic functions, like things lizards and snakes can do. And then we have our limbic system, which is our mammalian brain. It's our emotional brain. And this has a lot of power over the way we perceive and act in the world around us. Then there's our higher brain, or neocortex, which is kind of a more recent evolutionary add-on and upgrade. And it's hard to get access to our executive function, or rational thinking, or innovation, or creativity, or intuition when we're in a state of fear or panic, because the limbic system plugs directly into our heart rate, our breathing, our cellular metabolism, what genes get turned on and off. So when we get freaked out, we don't think so well, and we tend to have more fearful thoughts. This activates something called the negativity bias, which is the tendency to look for problems. So it's this, if you're in a room of 100 people and 99 people tell you how wonderful you are, but one person criticizes you, all your attention will go to the critic and not to the 99 people who adore you. And so we kind of have that as a survival mechanism. We're trying to look for threats and protect ourselves, but if we get in a state of chronic stress, we create a brain that's always finding some kind of threat, and we get our body wired up to expect to find that, and we can actually create stories that propagate more negativity, when in reality, a lot of that may not really be happening or in the way we think it's happening. So I've been seeing a lot of this during the pandemic. And so there's something when we go through trauma or stress called hypervigilance, which is that very same thing of just like, what's wrong? Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Oh my God, what if this happens? What if this happens? Oh my God. And then what if this happens? And then, oh my God. And then, and that's something we want to keep an eye on, because actually that creates stress hormones, which actually weaken our immune system and make us more susceptible to disease. And it's also not very functional when you're having to deal with something that lasts many months or a year, or maybe even over a year. Even though I'm hoping this thing will actually, there's a lot of evidence pointing to things kind of getting over the hump of this winter and things softening by spring. I still think it's important in the next few months to have tools to calm our nervous systems and have a more uplifting outlook that's also realistic. So a lot of people feel like if we don't act fearful enough, if we don't come from enough fear regarding this pandemic, then people are going to get lax and not take it seriously. And, I've talked to several people who are like, be careful on this webinar, because if you get people to relax too much, then they won't be careful. And then, this thing will spread and, we're all going to die, or at least a lot of people are going to die. And so I think there's a lot of misconception that fear is an effective motivator of behavior change. And it can in the short term to get you to run or take action, or, but when it's something sustained over time, it's not functional. And actually there's a lot of research showing that when you use fear to try to get behavior to change, whether it's parenting, whether it's in relationships, whether it's public health policy, people don't like the feeling, so they shut down, numb out, ignore it, or rebel. So while some people, there's certain segments of the population who will be like, okay, I want to be good. I'm going to be fearful. I'm going to be vigilant. I'm going to make sure everyone else is doing the right thing too. So you can go from these extremes between becoming like this righteous police enforcer of what you think everybody should be doing. And then there's this other extreme of rebel and like, I'm over this, like, forget it. I don't care anymore. Like, I can't handle this anymore. And so you get people who check out. And so I just want to make it clear that using fear to motivate ourselves is going to make us sick and mentally and physically ill, and it's not really going to help. So there is a tendency in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. So people, when you can get people's attention, you can get them, into hypervigilance. You can also get them to hyperfocus, and you can get them to consume your media. And so unfortunately, there is good news on the news, but there's also like a lot of negativity. And I think reporters and journalists are really doing their best. I don't think they're evil or out to get us or anything like that. I just, I think we need to be aware of claims and headlines that are fear-inducing, and kind of sit back and, just look for a bigger perspective. And I think a lot of people feel like there's this meta plan that's like trying to control us or whatever. I think there's always someone with an agenda. Like I learned in social sciences, like with a doctorate in a social science that was also overlapping in biological science, I learned that humans aren't that organized, but we think people are. So I think it's important to acknowledge special interests. Like in the pharmaceutical industry, the Food and Drug Administration is highly populated with representatives of the food industry and the drug industry. So there are special interests, and that's a very real thing. The media does propagate a lot of fear, which does change human behavior. So there's one idea, which is like a meta plan, like there's this big conspiracy to create something, to do something that's bad that might hurt us. But then there's also something that I call synergistic opportunism, which is just where circumstances align in a way that people are able to try to strategize getting their needs met, which is something humans do a lot. And sometimes they do it in a way that benefits everybody, and sometimes we do it in a way that hurts people. So I don't think of myself, I'm somewhere in the middle of the road. I don't think of myself as a conspiracy theorist, but I'm also willing to question things. And I also anticipate that I looked at who's here, and we have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have independents, we have people who are religious, who are atheists, who are spiritual but not religious. We have people who've been exposed, who've actually had the coronavirus. We have people who, we have a lot of people here, and we all have different ways of seeing the world. And I want to actually see that as a good thing, because if we can't question things, then it's dogma, not science. And I lived in Cuba, and I did my doctoral, my field work in Cuba, and I got to experience what it's like when you're not allowed to question, when there's, some state of total control and you can't question things. And it was horrendous. It was so toxic, and people were a wreck. And I still have, feelings about that. So whether I agree with someone or not, when someone's questioning something, whether I think they're brilliant or an idiot, or I don't know, I at least am able to be grateful that we are able to question. So I want to welcome you guys to question any and everything, but I just want to invite kind behavior and consideration for each other's points of view. Okay, let me just check the chat really quick. Oh, thanks, Caroline. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so again, I just want to emphasize that nature creates variety all the time, variety of moons and planets and plants and flowers and humans. And so I just want to welcome the variety of humans that are here. And I want to just stress that to enable to innovate, enable to solve a problem, in order to solve a problem, we have to have access to our intuition. We have to have access to our executive function, so that higher brain. We have to have freedom to question. We have to be able to have the curiosity to understand multiple perspectives and look at things from different angles, and which is open-mindedness. And we need to have a capacity for nuanced understanding, like looking at things like it's not, we've kind of gotten in, we're in that stress brain, fight or flight, which is your sympathetic nervous system. So when you're in sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, you're really stressed out, and it's hard to be intuitive and nuanced. We get into the limbic system is very black and white. It's like me now, protect myself. Are you safe or are you unsafe? Are you Republican or a Democrat? Are you with me or are you against me? And so I want to invite us to watch that thinking in this hour and in our lives in general. And so I want to just signal that it is a red flag. If you ever have any expert, I don't care if they're, for example, pro-vaxxer, anti-vaxxer, whatever they are, like in any subject, when you get someone who's so locked into their way of seeing the world that they can't take in any kind of new research or data, or be careful when people say there's no scientific evidence, that you kind of can't prove the absence of something. And I've seen so many doctors and scientists say there's no scientific evidence that, and I've actually gone and found studies on that subject. What they really mean is, I don't know of any, and if there was, I'm sure I would have heard of it by now. So just be aware that there can be studies and evidence on topics that we aren't aware of, and that doctors and even top experts aren't aware of. Okay, so that's my giant framing of this time together. And so one of the things I want to start with is, I like to do this when I do any kind of group meeting. You can participate or not. You can have your video on or off. But I like to just do a little guided meditation breathing thing, because this is a very simple way to get out of fight or flight and into your parasympathetic or resting and thriving nervous system state. So, so if you would like to participate, we're just gonna sit up tall and close our eyes. And the way we breathe completely changes our brain state. So the first thing I want you to do as you close your eyes is to notice how you're feeling. And then just start to slow down your breath. Noticing your heart rate, the temperature of the air in different parts of your skin. And we're just gonna breathe through our noses the best you can. If you can breathe through your nose, do it as much as possible. Nose breathing calms the nervous system. Deep, slow breathing calms the nervous system. feeling the sensations in your body calms the nervous system. So coming back into our bodies, getting out of our heads. And we're just going to take slow, deep breaths through our nose, fill up your belly. Inhale until no more breath can come in and take a little pause. Feel your ribs and diaphragm stretch. And then slowly exhaling through your nose, making your exhale longer than the inhale because your nervous system likes that too. So this is just really simple. Slowly inhaling through your nose. Retaining your breath. And when you can, slowly exhaling through your nose. You can even pause at the end of the exhale. So we'll just do that 5 more times at your own pace. Just take 2 more breaths together. Okay, you can sit with your eyes closed and listen, or you can open your eyes. And so that's just something very simple. Sometimes if I get agitated, it's nice to notice when you're feeling full and just take like 10 conscious breaths. So I've seen a lot of good news in this. So there have been a lot of negative things that have happened, but there's also been a lot of positivity. Like there are a lot of things we didn't know at the beginning of the epidemic that are better understood now. And so there's actually some things that I think are actually really good news and that I find very encouraging. And I've seen a lot of this kind of make little flashes through different articles buried in different places. A lot of this, some of it has made like the New York Times and headlines in the news, and some of it I find more buried, and I want to bring it to light. So it's true that one of the reasons we're calling this a pandemic and there's been quarantine and lockdown is because this virus is highly contagious. And even though like 80% of cases are actually fairly innocuous, there are the cases that are deadly, and there's a concern about overwhelming hospitals, right? So, but the cool thing is we're finding out it's not as contagious as we originally feared, and as some initial, media announcements might have told us. So when I tell, again, I just want to say, when I tell you, hey, it's not as contagious as we thought, it doesn't mean we are reckless about it. It just means we don't waste our time freaking out about things that aren't really going to be a threat, so we can save our resources for self-nurture, self-care, and the things that really do matter. I don't know why I'm phlegmy today. Anyway, I actually had a dream last night that I had coronavirus. Anyway, all right, so strategic caution versus recklessness. So we're not being reckless, we're just being strategically cautious. So there was a thought originally, people were using the word aerosol or airborne. So I just want to clarify that these droplets we're talking about, they're heavy droplets that fall quickly, and so a mask can catch them, so that's good. There was a fear that it could be aerosolized. There were some computer models that were generated that made it in like a graduate student did this, and it ended up in the media, and it actually turns out that's actually not how it works. So yeah, you can get, a sneeze to aerosolize and travel much further than 6 feet outdoors, and it can still exist in the air, but it's not in a form that is actually strong enough, potent enough, concentrated enough to actually inoculate a human and make a human sick. So this is actually not, generally when we say aerosol in infectious disease, we mean like these very small particles that stay suspended in the air for a long time. And the droplets are more what can be caught in a mask, what comes out in a sneeze or a cough. So what we're finding is that indoor air is an issue. because of concentration of these droplets in the air, even though they drop quickly. But outdoors does not seem to be a problem. So all that, I was really upset in Hawaii when they closed the trails, because there's so much science showing that people aren't getting this outdoors. The one exception would be if, say, you're in a stadium with thousands of people and there are partitions, and it's any kind of outdoor scenario with walls that create small spaces and stagnant air, then that could increase risk if people are wearing masks, not so much. But if you're outdoors, if you're going for a run or a walk, or you're on the beach or something like that, you can wear a mask if it comforts you. I'm not going to criticize you if you want to wear a mask, but just know it's pretty much, like, from everything I'm reading, it's pretty impossible to catch COVID-19 outdoors. It even seems like, when you're standing, you can still social distance, but it just looks like it would be really hard to, like, stand outside, walk on the beach with a friend and transmit the virus because of air, because of ozone, because of sunlight. And even at night, the way the air moves and distributes and damages the RNA, the genetic information of the virus. So just don't stress outside unless it just comforts you to wear a mask. The other thing is all this sterilizing surfaces. Probably a lot of you may have stopped doing that a long time ago. People weren't sure. They worried about fomites, which are surface contamination. Looks like that's not an issue. So exception would be hospitals need to sterilize, food prep areas need to sterilize. But in your everyday living, you don't need to go around sterilizing everything. That's just not how people are catching this. So you can just, like, not worry. So of, like, the three main ways that, viruses, can be passed, like aerosolized, fomites, surface exposure, those actually aren't an issue with COVID-19. We have to focus on the air droplets and indoor air. So I want also people to understand that in order for you to, like, catch it, there have to be a certain number of viral particles, and your immune system has to be compromised to a certain degree. So either you have a high load of a virulent strain and you have a strong immune system that gets you anyway, or you may get a less virulent strain and have a high immune system, in which case you could be exposed and not get sick at all, or you could even develop immunity without getting symptomatic. So there's a question of, like, the viral load, like how many particles of virus get in your system, and then if your system allows them to replicate enough to make you sick. So there's some people who are getting just enough exposure to make antibodies and have T-cell memory, but they're not getting exposed enough to get sick. And some people are calling that a de facto vaccine. So when you're trying to protect yourself, there's a lot of emotion around the mask thing. I understand why masks are encouraged. I also understand why people don't like the government telling them they have to wear masks. I don't really want to get into that whole debate. Masks do catch the droplets that could create contagion. Most people, I heard someone say most people aren't catching it. Even if they're wearing masks out in public, they can still get it. It doesn't seem to make an impact, but it seems like they're actually getting it from people they were unmasked with. So just something to consider. But at the same time, we can't, I don't think it's necessarily healthy to go isolate and crawl in a hole and, end our lives. So I encourage people to think about, to assess risk. For example, in Hawaii, we have such a low infection rate and such a low mortality rate that, technically, according to the statistics we have here, it wouldn't even qualify as a pandemic, even though the state of Hawaii is still taking precautions. There are other states where the percent of positive tests of people getting tested is like over 50% of people getting tested are getting positive, and hospitals are getting slammed. So you kind of need to know your area. If you're in a high contagion area, you might need to take more precautions. If you're in a place like Hawaii with, like, fresh air and sunshine and, whatever, very low contagion, which I think a lot of those go together, by the way, then you don't, you can be a little more, I don't want to say risky, but you don't have to worry as much. And then you have to assess your own health and vitality. If you are someone who has, gone through chemo, you've been on immunosuppressant drugs, like you've had an organ transplant, people who are alcoholics, struggling with alcoholism, drug addiction, people who just eat a bunch of junk food, don't get enough sleep, under a lot of stress, people with cardiovascular disease that are in a compromised situation, people with lung disease, which actually there's one little exception I'll tell you. These people are most at risk of complication and death. So one of the things that's predictive is insulin resistance. So people who have blood sugar issues. I'm not going to take the time to explain insulin resistance right now, but it has to do with how your body's able to, hear the hormone insulin and take in glucose. And so one of the signs that you're having insulin resistance issues is belly fat. So like the circumference around your navel of your belly. And so, so people with belly fat, people who are overweight, people who have blood sugar issues. Now you can be thin, you can have visceral fat that doesn't, they're thin people with diabetes. So, so you need to set, history of autoimmunity too. Actually, some people with autoimmunity can fight off the initial stage of the virus really well, but might struggle with this, one of the second phases, which is the cytokine storms that happen in some people. It gets into your lungs and causes almost like an autoimmune type reaction where your body attacks itself. And a lot of people are dying because of that. One of the interesting things is that some people have found that some people who are taking asthma medication regularly actually are having fewer complications, and that's led to a study I'll tell you about in just a little bit. But just know that understanding insulin sensitivity and improving yours is one of the most important ways you can protect yourself, because it's directly tied to your immune system. One of the things I'm not seeing people talking about is building resilience. We're talking about avoiding the virus, we're mad at the virus, we want to kill the virus, but we're not looking at how we've made ourselves such ideal hosts. So if you look at Japan, who has a much healthier lifestyle than the United States, their statistics are way better and they've had to take less precautionary measures. Whereas in our country, the United States statistically is the most unhealthy and unhappy of the most industrialized countries. And that's why we're getting hit so hard mentally and physically, because we're already so vulnerable. So just be aware of habits that might be increasing your risk. I don't want to shame anyone. Like if you like to have a drink, if you smoke, if you eat a lot of sugar or junk food, I mean, that's your life, it's your decision. I'm just telling you that that's gonna, make your immunity weaker depending on your resilience as a human. And so I see this as a time, and I'll talk about this later, I see this as a time to take better care of ourselves and to make different choices than we have been. I see this as an opportunity. So yeah. So one of the questions I get a lot is, what do I do if I got exposed? This actually happened to my mom recently, actually twice. And so like what happens if I find out someone I was hanging out with test positive for COVID? So I talked to a good friend of mine who's an infectious disease specialist. She's a microbiologist. She's working in contact tracing. She's working with COVID a lot. And so her recommendation was that, well, number one, make sure you get a PCR test. That may take a little longer to get results, but it's more accurate. I mean, you could do a rapid test that day, but still get a PCR test as soon as you can, because that's going to be more accurate. So the rapid tests are really only useful. They're highly inaccurate, highly inaccurate. It made the news that Elon Musk got 4 of them and 2 were positive and 2 were negative. So they say that the positive ones are usually accurate, but the negative ones are often false negatives. So I didn't really follow up on Elon Musk if he actually had COVID, but the point is the rapid tests are kind of, they're only really useful like for like say a corporation, just to test employees as they go into an office, or actors on a movie set. It's to test people who would go ahead and assume the risk anyway. It's not clinically diagnostic. So don't consider a rapid test. Like if you've had coronavirus, don't go get a rapid test and then go back to work. Actually, my mom and I know someone who we think did that, and he's a pharmacist and we love him very much, but we feel like that wasn't necessarily the best strategy. So you want to, if you get exposed, get the PCR test, and the antigen test, the rapid test, isn't very accurate. Now, if you want an antibody test, you think you may have been exposed and you want to see if you have antibodies, you can get the antibody test. I've heard that the ELISA test, ELISA, is highly accurate, but just keep in mind that just because you test negative for antibodies doesn't mean you actually haven't had it, because your T cells, there's evidence showing your T cells and your immune system can actually remember immunity to the virus, which is some other good news. I don't know if you guys have seen news coming out that initial studies, it's looking like people who've been exposed are retaining their immunity. And then they're also looking at data from SARS-CoV-1 and seeing that there are enough similarities in our immune response to SARS-CoV-1 to believe that we would also confer the long-term immunity of people who've had SARS-CoV-1, which up to now, it's been like 17 years and, people are still immune to SARS-CoV-1. So that's been some very recent good news. It looks like once you're immune, you have that immunity for a long time. We don't know for sure, but it's looking that way, which is something to celebrate. Let's see. Okay. Oh, and then some people wanted to know, okay, so if you're exposed, get a PCR test. Oh, that's the three test precaution. That friend I was talking about, she also recommends that you really make sure you get 3 negative tests, before you return to work, or before you rule out that you actually have it. She said, so over a period of like 14 days, get 3 tests. You probably want to wait a few days, from like 5 days from your initial exposure, and then over 2 weeks, get at least 3 tests. And it should be free, either covered by insurance, or the government picks up the tab if you don't have insurance. All right. So, and other people have asked, how do I know if I do get it, if I should go to the hospital? So we don't want people flooding the hospital unnecessarily. That's a problem. But if you wait too long, it can be deadly. So that's a problem. So the CDC guidelines for when to go to the hospital is if you're having, and it's kind of logical, if you're having trouble breathing, if you feel pressure in your chest, or pain in your chest, if you're having mental confusion that's new, like that you weren't already that way, if you're having a new level of mental confusion because maybe low oxygen basically, or if you have an inability to wake up or stay awake, or if your lips start to turn kind of bluish. So those are all signs of breathing problems, and you need to go to the hospital ASAP if that's happening. But if not, you probably are fine healing at home. And you can always call your primary care physician and get guidance there. So now I want to move on to, now that we know more about like how it's spread, how it's not spread, you know, the best testing, that kind of thing. I want to look at what do we need to do to put social distancing behind us? So I want to look at like, why are we even social distancing in the first place? Well, because, you know, remember, flatten the curve, you know, so we don't want the cases spiking so fast that hospitals can't handle the load. So that means we need fewer people going to the hospital. And also one of the other reasons is because initially in China, this virus was having about a 4% mortality rate, which is twice influenza, which is kind of the standard of like, if it's any worse than the flu, then we need to be careful because of hospital overwhelm. So, so we need to get mortality down, and we need to not overload the hospitals. So, okay, so the other way we've heard of is herd immunity. Like, okay, it's not another way. One of the ways we can lower mortality and lower hospital visits is herd immunity. There are other ways too, but I'll talk about herd immunity. So you can get herd immunity, which is enough people have immunity to it that they're able to kind of serve as walls that protect people who haven't been exposed, and lower the risk. It basically kind of stops the virus from finding hosts. So you can get it 2 ways. You can get exposed. So there's the long distance, low grade exposure where you make antibodies and you confer immunity without actually getting sick. You're an asymptomatic or low symptomatic carrier. You can actually get the virus and get sick and get symptomatic and have a very mild case. You can also have a severe case, but get exposed and survive it. But given in the good old days, that was how people got over pandemics. A lot of people died, and then the people who are left standing conferred immunity, and then it just kind of die out, right? But a lot of people feel like that's a pretty cruel way to go about it. There are ways to not vaccinate and still slow down the virus or the impact of the virus. So the word vaccine, I get nervous even talking about the word vaccine because people, I even know you guys, have very different views on them. And so I'm somewhere in the middle of the road. Like, I'm not a pro-vaxxer, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm concerned about vaccine safety, which I think any scientifically minded person does. And here's what's interesting to me. I see all these, like I saw this guy giving a talk on Time Magazine on his website, and I see all these people speaking with great authority, like with unquestioningly in favor of vaccines and tearing down anyone who questions them, which is not scientific. I've also seen a lot of misinformation. People who are, concerned about vaccines are getting a hold of information that's terrifying them, that's actually, as far as I can tell, not based on anything even remotely true and action. And I like that I have friends in the medical field and also in the medical research and biological research fields, microbiologists who are actually, really understand the science behind vaccines and the research of vaccines, and they're real humans. They're not, evil monsters who are trying to like poison everybody and kill everybody. So, but when you talk to the scientists who are involved in it, they acknowledge there are problems with vaccines. There are side effects. That is true. No scientist will ever be able to tell you that there aren't risks with vaccines. So I want to open up a conversation where we can acknowledge that vaccines have risks, We can assess what those risks likely are, especially with the RNA vaccine, and then people can make their own decision about whether they feel comfortable vaccinating or not. And there are enough people, I believe, that are going to want to get the vaccine voluntarily. It doesn't look like there's any talk of mandatory vaccinations, which I think a lot of people have been concerned about. It looks like that's not even going to happen. Right now, there's a concern about getting enough vaccines made and distributed to people who actually want it. So it looks like if you're not comfortable with getting vaccinated, you will be free to not get vaccinated. And it looks like polls are showing enough people are willing to get vaccinated that we can achieve herd immunity when the vaccines roll out. So we don't have to get in a fight with each other. We don't have to hate on each other, So I'm going to give you a little more information about what I've learned about the RNA vaccines to help you make a decision. Again, it's up to you. You need to do your own research. Disclaimer. Okay, so vaccines have pros and cons. I'm going to tell you the cool things about the RNA vaccine. So the RNA vaccine, I'm going to tell you what it is actually. So the RNA vaccine it's basically RNA. Okay, DNA is like your genetics. It's like kind of the hard code. RNA transcribes your DNA. It makes a copy of your DNA, and then that's the instructions, like a recipe to bake something. That's the instructions to make proteins that drive every function in your body. So the RNA vaccine is the recipe for some of the spike proteins on the virus that are actually what allow it to get into cells. So, and that's what your immune system looks for. Okay, I just saw a question from Catherine. I'll get it in a second. Okay, I love questions. So, what was I saying? Okay, so the RNA, the idea behind the RNA, there was a theoretical idea of a DNA vaccine, but there was concern that the DNA could get into the nucleus of cells and interfere with our own DNA. So those are more of a theoretical vaccine. The old school vaccine is more a protein vaccine. It's one where you take, basically a dead or deactivated virus and inject it into the person, and hopefully their immune system will create immunity against it without them getting sick. But then there were, some people will react to some of the adjuvants and preservatives and things in the vaccine or to the antigen itself. So that's where vaccine injury comes from. So the RNA vaccines, they're not like DNA vaccines, so they can't get in the nucleus of a cell and change your DNA. So there's a lot of fear going around that we're going to genetically mutate ourselves. And that's actually not, from everything I can see, it just looks like that's really not possible. I understand why people are afraid of that, but it doesn't look like that's what's happening. So, so the idea is that you get injected with the recipe to make the spike proteins, and then your immune system, creates an immunity against those. And so then if you're exposed to the actual virus, your body remembers that, and then hopefully would not allow it. You would have immunity. It couldn't take over your body and make you sick. So that's kind of cool. So another reason it's a little safer than some of the older vaccines is because, see, a lot of us, me included, very concerned about rushing a vaccine. Normally it takes 10 years. So you're between a rock and a hard place. You wait 10 years to do a vaccine, the really slow way, and we live with this, and we live with this pandemic, or whatever, we have to live with the consequences of that, or we accelerate it and then we take kind of an educated risk and we vaccinate. So here's one of the things I've learned about the RNA vaccine and this whole cold storage thing. One of the reasons that it needs that cold storage is they're actually not using, in order to speed up approval, they're not using any preservatives or adjuvants. So they're not putting a lot of the weird chemicals in these vaccines, because that creates more complications and would slow approval. So to slow approval, they're just making it require really cold storage, which is a little difficult for distribution, but it actually could potentially, the rush in this case could actually potentially make it safer. So what we don't know now, I'm going to go into the anticipated risks. And these are actually from science papers written by research scientists who are vaccine developers, who are pro-vaccine. These are not anti-vaxxers, for pro-vaxxers out there, but they're talking about what are some of the anticipated risks that could come up with these RNA vaccines. And because, well, one is just unanticipated risk, right? We always have blind spots. Everything that's ever, most things that have made people sick or caused a problem were never done on purpose. It was, now a lot of ones they were discovered to be a problem weren't stopped because of financial incentive, but it's not usually done on purpose. So there are just unanticipated risks. we're guinea pigs. Like, we just don't know what could happen that we couldn't possibly, they're making very educated guesses to try to make it safe, but we just don't know. One of the concrete potential problems that I've been reading about is the risk of autoimmunity. So for people who have a history of autoimmunity, overreactive immune system, or also people who are very hypersensitive to chemicals, like I've had toxic mold poisoning and it's created a hypersensitivity to a lot of chemicals. So I'm very sensitive to that kind of thing. My immune system tends to overreact to certain chemicals. So for people who are very sensitive in that way, or people who have a lot of autoimmune risk, what I keep reading are these vague statements that precautions should be taken, but no one is saying what precautions yet. So I don't know. So if you have a history of autoimmunity, or you're a very chemically sensitive person, or just a very sensitive person, or you might want to hold off and get more information, or let some other guinea pigs move through the process and see what happens. If you're someone who feels really robust and you're like, don't feel like that's an issue, and you really feel inclined to get the vaccine, like your gut feeling is say, hey, I want to do this, then you're probably helping out a lot of people, especially people who are vulnerable to the vaccine, or who would be more likely to receive a vaccine injury. There are also some genetic predispositions. If you've had your genetics tested, I'm not going to get off into that. That's a whole rabbit hole. But there are certain detox pathway issues. There's certain things that make people more sensitive or less able to detoxify, or have more trouble regulating their immune system. And so if you happen to know you have genes like that, or want to find out, that would be something to take into account. Let's see. Yeah, and so I think a lot of you have already heard we need like 60-70% herd immunity. So a certain percentage of that is going to come from people who are just going to get it before the vaccine comes out. And then it looks like, again, polls show that enough people are willing to get the vaccine that, we should be able to confer herd immunity that way. And I have been talking to a lot of doctors and scientists and saying, are you going to get the vaccine? And it's interesting because a lot of people I thought were going to be like, hell yeah, I'm getting the vaccine, are like, yeah, I'm going to wait. Like, I'm going to wait a year. So, I kind of, I was just curious. And so there's very mixed feelings, even in the science and medical community. Some people feel really comfortable with it, and some people want to wait. So I think it's important that we make room for everybody. If people aren't comfortable, we shouldn't force them. And there's no sign right now that that's going to happen. So if you've been worried about mandatory vaccines, you can relax. At least for now, it doesn't look like that's an issue. Access is more of an issue. So I'd like to invite us to stop polarizing vaxxers and anti-vaxxers. I actually there was a time my mom was very sick last year, and so I cheered myself up by watching a lot of stand-up comedy, and almost every single stand-up comedian trashed anti-vaxxers ruthlessly without even so anyway, and I feel like a lot of these people said things that were very uninformed. So anyway, I think we need to be a little more midline on the vaccine thing, where we can question it, but we don't have to demonize it completely either. And I also just want to acknowledge there are special interests. There's a huge profit margin around this. Like, let's not kid ourselves. So, one of the things I've been dealing with my whole professional life is, what I call a medical gaslighting, where if you try to question something, then you are torn down and made out to be crazy or a quack or whatever. And that's changed recently. More and more doctors are very open-minded, more aware of the side effects of medications, and there's more open-mindedness and openness to integrated medicine and lifestyle and things like that. But when I first started out, there wasn't that openness, and it was really stressful. And I feel like the area of vaccination is one area left where, we can now question statins, whereas before you were insane if you questioned statins, but there's so much data showing statins are a problem, right? So, we need to get to that point with vaccines where we can have open dialogues and question it and not go to extremes. Okay. All righty. Okay. So beyond herd immunity through immunization, there are some cool ways we can lower overall mortality and stop the hospital overload. So number one, I just want another celebration, another positive thing is that there's been a huge drop in mortality. So it looked like there used to be you had like a 25.6% chance of dying if you ended up in the hospital with COVID. Now it's down to about 7.6%, which is still very high, not a pretty statistic, but it's so much better in a relatively short amount of time. So if you zoom out and look at kind of historical precedent and how nature works, this is fast. Like, we're innovating fast. So go humans, good job. I'm not a fan of unnecessary use of pharmaceuticals or steroids, but certain medications can be life-saving. So my mom wouldn't be alive right now if it weren't for certain medications and chemicals and biotech or whatever. So I have a balance, I try to keep a balanced view of that. So I try to only use pharmaceuticals when they're absolutely necessary and life-saving. Otherwise, I pretty much have some kind of either lifestyle or supplement or plant-based, not like dietary, but like something that came from a plant that will work for most things. But there are there's some research there. Doctors started noticing that people who were using asthma inhalers weren't getting severe cases and complications. And the educated guess is because these inhalers are calming down this phase of the virus that you guys have heard about with the cytokine storm. So initially you want your immune system to fight off the virus, but if it moves deep into your lungs, sometimes people can go into an overreaction, like a cytokine storm, like an autoimmune response, where your immune system starts damaging your own lung tissue. And that's where people are. Ooh, Karen says, oh, sorry. Claire says you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Okay. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for the messages. Okay. So, Claire, did you miss a lot? Was that happening a long time? Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay. So, what I'm coming to is there's a study between Oxford University and Queensland University in Australia looking at inhaled steroids to see if they can actually help keep people out of the hospital. So when people start feeling pressure in their lungs, can they nebulize or use an inhaler to downregulate their immune system? And so there have been doctors who've been actually just doing this, even though it's not a standard treatment. Even though like long-term use of steroids has complications, doing it for like 5 days, I don't think is a problem. Actually, being as natural as I am, my mom and I decided that, she talked to her doctor and he wrote her a prescription for something called budesonide. And she has a nebulizer and she's ready to nebulize that if she needs to, if she does get COVID. But we also have a lot of things before that. We have a contingency plan. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. Not too much later though, because we're nearing the end of this until we open up discussion. So here's something I'm very excited about. So there's this herb called andrographis, and I'm going to open up the chat and type it. Oh, and then I'll type that other drug. I'm not recommending this drug. That's just what we came up with, but there are other ones. And then there's another steroid. There are also people using like prednisone and systemic steroids too for the same thing. Okay, yeah, I was just catching up on some of the questions. Okay, all right. So, so andrographis, basically, I don't understand the microbiology. I'm going to read you a quote, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understand what this means. It says it's from a study on andrographis and its success in killing okay, so andrographis is great for urinary tract infections. It's great for colitis. It's great for like certain oral cancers, HIV. Like this herb has been used in Ayurveda for thousands of years. It's used in Chinese medicine. It's one of the most heavily researched plants because it does really incredible things. It's highly effective. There's so much research behind it. And so one of the things that's done a good job of is killing different strains of coronavirus, because coronavirus originally is just it's just like a respiratory virus that a lot of us have already had. We've already all had coronaviruses. All of us have. We all have. And so, but SARS-CoV-1 was like the SARS epidemic. That one killed people. It didn't spread very fast because it killed its host. One of the reasons this one spreads so ubiquitously is because it actually isn't that damaging or symptomatic to a large percent of people. So it's easier to spread. So anyway, so scientists figured like, okay, a lot of what worked for SARS-CoV-1 is working for SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-1, andrographis worked. It killed it. So SARS-CoV-2, it looks like that is also the case. Very, very cool, because I would rather do this than, a lot of other pharmaceuticals. That's my personal opinion. But I know a lot of you are in the medical field and have mixed feelings about pharmaceuticals. So I respect individual choice. So andrographilide and its fluorescent derivatives inhibit the main protease of 2019 coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2 through covalent linkage. But basically, in a nutshell, it kills the virus. So that's the mechanism of action for those of you who understand better than me. Maybe you can clarify it to everybody. Okay, So another thing that's very cool I'm seeing around this pandemic, another positive thing, is that mainstream medical doctors are actually acknowledging the efficacy of supplements, which historically that was not the case. So like N-acetylcysteine, which helps your liver make glutathione. It's a really master antioxidant. It's something really important for detoxification and lowering inflammation. And it actually is really helpful in the lungs. We talked about this in a previous talk. So NAC, N-acetylcysteine. Zinc has gotten a lot, it may be overinflated, but it's gotten a lot of attention. Zinc is good. I don't think it's gonna, that alone is gonna do it, but you know, can't hurt. It does help support immunity. Vitamin C, B vitamins, melatonin. Melatonin, a lot of people think it's just for sleep, but it's actually one of the most crucial parts of your immune system, which is why people who don't get enough sleep are more likely to get sick, but also get cancer. So melatonin can actually kill cancer cells, but it also helps modulate the immune system. And it's very important for the mitochondria of your cells, the energy producing organelles, like little parts of your cells that make energy, which affects how aging and disease. So like Trump was actually given, I think zinc and maybe vitamin C, but he was given melatonin that's being used especially in obese and diabetic people. Let's see. Oh yeah. And I think I just implied this, but it's so important to get enough sleep, guys. Like so important to not sacrifice your sleep if you want to have resilient immunity and health and happiness. So much science on this. Okay. Oh, and then there's just a lot of other really interesting data on cannabis, ozone, curcuminoids, which is basically the active compounds in turmeric, boswellia, which is frankincense, and different kinds of mushrooms for modulating the immune system. Because again, one of the problems is if your immune system's too weak or overactive, then you have a problem. Modulating the immune system means kind of like making it functional and kind of midline. So it's not like going to either extreme. And there's also interesting information, like some people are looking at nebulizing glutathione. If you know what glutathione is, it's that master antioxidant I was just talking about. So you're breathing it into your lungs. Also, some people are using colloidal silver and nebulizing that. I don't know how many studies are on that, but there is a lot of research on colloidal silver in general as an antiviral and antibacterial. So what I think is cool is that a lot of alternative medicine is getting some attention, whereas there used to be a tendency to just be completely dismissive of it. So I feel like the desperation is creating, like fear, the negativity of fear is how we just don't think so well and we become very chaotic, we become very divisive and polarized, and we get into this us versus them mindset and this all or nothing thinking. That's the shadow side of fear. But the one good thing I've seen about fear, especially my clients, is when we're concerned enough, well, actually it opens up a window of innovation and willingness. So a lot of people, it'd be great if they take care of their health because you're inspired to take care of your health. But a lot of times people aren't willing until they're afraid. And so I just don't want people to get stuck in afraid. So I do like that the need for innovation for this virus has opened people's minds up a little bit around integrative health and just willingness to look at the importance of our health. And also the importance of human contact and touch and hugging, which are very important. So I want us to be very careful about over-sterilizing and over-alienating, over-isolating, because that can be very detrimental to people's health. I think you guys have already heard there have been increases in domestic abuse, addiction, and suicide, and just horribly unhealthy habits. People are self-medicating. This may resonate with a lot of you with, junk food and cigarettes and alcohol and recreational drugs to try to feel better, which I understand, not wanting to feel bad. But if we do it in a way that feels good now, but in the long run makes us weaker, destroys our health, then that's not really the best strategy. But again, when we're stressed out, we don't make the best decisions because we're being more reactive and not proactive. So one of the most important things we need to start with is modulating our nervous systems, like really chilling out our nervous systems and doing things to build health. So not just fighting the virus, but building health. Some people have asked about, Niraj, why isn't that open? It's, we basically have to wear masks in public, but, and we're allowed to be at the beach, and that we can't have groups. Let's see, outdoor groups can be 10, indoor groups have to be 5 or less. Let me see what else you wrote. Let's see. Oh yeah. Yeah, it might be more open than where you are. Okay. Yeah, I feel like it is pretty chill here in Hawaii. We are being careful. I think we're being more careful than the actual presentation of the virus, but that may not be a bad thing. Oh, and I also want to clarify, we're still in the first wave. So this winter isn't a second wave. We haven't had like a real winter global wave yet. So we're still in the first wave. So I know we're tired. We want it to be over, but we need to just understand that as we go into winter, as we go into like flu season, it's also going to kind of be a COVID season. So we do, you know, I don't want us to be terrified. I want us to be educated. So we know where we can protect ourselves that's actually going to do some good, and where we can relax and loosen up a little bit and get our most basic human needs met. We do need connection. We do need to be touched and held. We do need, you know, we need nutritious food. We need sleep. We need to calm our nervous systems. We need self-care. And so getting really freaked out and being in a hypervigilant state, you know, isn't going to make things better. It's going to make the pandemic worse, not better. Some people were asking about long hauler syndrome. And that's an interesting topic, because in the mainstream media, it's portrayed as this very idiosyncratic thing. Like, you know, I read a story about a girl in her 30s who, you know, wouldn't seem like a candidate for long hauler syndrome, and she's really struggling. So where I found really good answers for that is actually more in the functional medicine and integrative health community, because a lot of practitioners are seeing that people, okay, first long haulers, let me interrupt myself. Long haulers, like having long standing consequences of like a virus, like Epstein-Barr virus, tick-borne pathogens, toxic mold, and I've had a lot of experience with that one. These are all different kinds of pathogens that actually do cause what we're calling long hauler syndrome. They cause people to have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It's chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It's CIRS. So this isn't a new thing for a virus to result in people's immune systems. It's like your immune system has PTSD and it's like reliving it and it doesn't know how to stop. So there's debate as to whether you actually still have these pathogens in your system versus whether you have an immune memory and your immune system's shadowboxing something that isn't there anymore. But this isn't a new thing. So a lot of the same strategies that are used to treat people with, you know, longstanding like Epstein-Barr, you know, Lyme, toxic mold, things like that, also can be effective for long haulers. And what I'm also hearing practitioners say is that a lot of people who have the long hauler syndrome, they're actually doing mycotoxin panels, finding out they have mold in their house. Having mold in your house is not a good idea if you get exposed to COVID. It increases your risk of getting sick and of having trouble recovering. People who do have active Epstein-Barr, or you know, people who've gotten sick from Lyme sickness, you know, need to be, you know, extra nurturing and careful. I can help people with that. Let's see. So anyway, so I think what freaks us out is feeling like there's no rhyme or reason to why some people are getting really sick and others aren't. And so what my theory is that there is reason, like that people are getting long hauler syndrome because maybe they're smoking or vaping like the vapes that are toxic and hard on the lungs, or that they have mold in their house, or that they have some kind of low-lying parasitic or, you know, pathogen, some kind of pathogen or some kind of microbes in their system that have caused a problem, and that COVID is putting them over the edge. And I just got a question from Catherine about downregulating the cytokine storms. So I would say, like, as far as something you do in your home, you know, well, I would just, you know, the antigraph is to try to kill, oh, I get another thing about sound. Oh, thanks, Raj. So what was I saying? Oh, so cytokine storms, these are going to be things like, again, I have to be careful what I say because I'm not a medical practitioner, and, you know, I'm looking at, a lot of this is educated guesses while we're still getting more data, but from what I'm seeing from my personal use and from my mom, you know, these are, you know, who I want to protect. And then of course, clients, there's promise with cannabis, with turmeric, helping modulate, and different kinds of mushrooms and modulating the immune system. In terms of something that would be a pharmaceutical, like if you were in distress, then I would say the inhaled steroids. Like my mom got that prescription. I put it in the name of the medication in the chat. There are other ones too. And so, yeah. And also you want to be careful just not to take herbs. Okay, Robert, it's good to see you. You can watch the replay for the rest of it later. Yeah, so I lost my train of thought. But anyway, yeah, so the steroids is one way. And then if you end up in the hospital, then, you know, you'll probably receive some kind of immunosuppressant or steroid therapy. let's see. But what I was going to say is there's certain herbs. There's some debate. You might want to Google this, like what herbs might overstimulate the immune system. So there's certain things people take. There's some debate around, echinacea and elderberry. And I don't actually remember where discussion landed on those two, because it's been a while since I read about them. But the idea is you just don't want to overactivate the immune system once you feel it moving into your chest and lungs, if that even happens, because a lot of people get it and that doesn't even happen. But I do want to say that we need to take precautions, but just avoiding the virus isn't enough. And we can't hide forever. So we need to focus on building our resilience as a population. And so I kind of want to wrap up this talk, I'm almost done, with putting the virus into perspective about global health epidemics we're not freaking out about. So diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disease are killing way more people than this virus. So I'm not saying we don't be careful about the virus. I'm saying, we're scared of the virus because it's contagious. It's spread through air droplets, through body fluids. So if someone sneezes in your mouth or coughs on your face, like, you can get sick from it, right? And there would be someone else giving it to you. And so, it's hard to control that. So I understand why we're afraid of contagious disease, right? But there's a different kind of contagious disease, which is through thoughts and habits and culture. So we have a culture where we've normalized living in ways where we don't get enough sleep, we're under way too much stress, and we're eating crap, and we think it's normal, and we are spreading, we have viral habits and viral thoughts and viral beliefs that are spreading and killing people a lot faster and, than this coronavirus. And so what I think is beautiful is this opportunity. I see this as a one of opportunity. If this is a virus that is most deadly to people who don't take good care of themselves, then is this not an invitation to start taking better care of ourselves as humans, and especially in this country where we have really terrible habits that we've actually shared with the whole world. So now it's actually, a lot of these problems are happening all over the world, and even pets are getting the same diseases as humans, because dog food is really, and pet food is usually not very healthy, depending on where you get it. There is some healthy pet food. So anyway, and I also want to just wrap up by addressing the victim mentality. I see a lot of people being like, I hate the coronavirus, F the coronavirus. And I understand why we feel that way. But that puts us in a helpless victim mentality. And we have a lot of opportunity here to take personal responsibility. And let me take it to one more level as I'm wrapping up. So on a global level, did this happen to us, or did we help create it? So there are a lot of scientists pointing out that a lot of these pandemics, especially the ones that are coming out of China, are coming out of the most polluted parts of the planet. So when we destroy habitats and ecosystems, we actually create pandemics, parasites, viruses, things like that. So I'm going to give you a metaphor. So when I always think of how biology works, how science works, it's like we're discovering it's as above, so below, from the micro to the macro. So if you look at the Earth as like a living entity, and you look at global warming or climate change as the Earth having a fever or inflammation, you can look at these viruses, these pandemics, as like the Earth's immune system getting rid of a parasite. And so we need to consider, are we living as parasites on this planet, or are we living as beneficial microbes? So one of the problems with this whole pandemic is people wanting to over-sterilize, but over-sterilizing makes us weak. We need cooties. We need exposure to microbes. We need to get outside. Like, one of the best things you can do, if you don't want to interact with humans, take some risk with some humans, which would also actually be beneficial. If you can, like, pet animals that run around outside, if you can go out on a hike or a walk in nature, you need to be exposed to microbes to have a resilient immune system. Your immune system is like going to the gym. It's like muscles, like you have to work it or it gets weak. And so don't over sterilize, don't over isolate, go outside if you can, get cooties, get germs, get in soil, get in fresh air, get in an intact ecosystem, get in a forest if you can. And I just want to point out that we've all enjoyed cheap stuff from China. So I think as humans, we need to really think about what we're doing to the planet so that we can get our stuff. And I think we're going to keep having pandemics until we relate to nature differently. So I do believe in economic abundance. I believe in companies making profits. I believe in people having money. I think that's fine. I just think we need to find ways to do it where we don't destroy our habitat and ourselves. So anyway, that's kind of how I want to wrap up, that when we fight nature wins every time. When we work with and nurture health, then we come out on top. So all my clients who've ever healed supposedly incurable diseases, it was because they figured out the root causes, and they worked how nature works to let their body heal itself. I don't heal people. They didn't say, oh, I'm healing myself. They created the conditions for their bodies to heal themselves. And that's something we can do with COVID, and it's something we can do with the planet. So anyway, that's the paradigm shift I would like to invite. And I also want to just invite us to focus more on what we want than on what we don't want. If we get all bogged down in what we're afraid of, we're going to miss the boat on creating the life we want. So this is a time to really focus on taking care of yourself, on deciding what's in your control. How can you create more fulfillment in your life? How can you create more happiness and joy in your life? Like, how can you really be the architect of your own experience? So that's kind of where I want to wrap up. Oh, and there's so much information I wasn't able to convey, even running over a few minutes. So I've had a bunch of people asking me to put together some kind of workshop weekend. So what I'm going to do is probably in a couple of weeks, I have to look at the calendar, but if there's interest, so when I send out the replay, I'll ask you guys, and you can reply, would you be interested in a workshop weekend in a couple of weeks, in 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, where we just spend a little bit of time on either 2 or 3 different days, and we just go over, like, I can share my COVID plan, like my contingency plan for my mom and I, and what I would recommend to my clients with all the disclaimers, but very specific plan of like what to do in different stages, how to know what to do if you get it. Also talk more about nutrition and how to make yourself resilient so you don't get it in the first place, or if you get it, you get a mild case. Or like, how many of you have a plan? Like, if you get it, how many of you have a plan? I'll get you in just a second, Ellen. Thank you for raising your hand. So I want to offer a plan. So we have a plan, like, where are you going to get food? Where are you going to eat? What are you going to take? Do you have supplements already bought waiting for you in case it happens? Or are you going to have to be waiting a few days to get something in the mail, or having a poor selection at your local health food store that may not be as good of quality? So that kind of thing. And I also want to talk about the nervous system and things we can do for sleep and for our nervous system. So, and that one I'm going to make super affordable. I'm probably only going to charge like $150 for that, because I just want anyone and I'm not going to put a limit on how many people can participate, because I want anyone and everyone to be able to do it. I will talk about insulin sensitivity and how to optimize your insulin sensitivity. That's a complex thing. When I wrap this up, a couple of you that were asking about that, I'll stay and answer that a little better. But it has to do with like how your body manages. It has a lot to do with diet and stress and toxins in your system. Let's see. Oh, and then just like in February, I think, well, actually let me do it in late December. So in either late January. So either in late January or early February, I'm also going to be offering a program that's going to be several weeks. It might be like 10 or 12 weeks or something like that. So those of you that have quarantine belly, I'm going to help you unlock those pounds from lockdown. But I don't do a diet approach. I hate dieting and I hate willpower. It sucks. So it'll be a non-diet approach where we're losing weight as a happy side effect of gaining health, because that's how it works. And so this one's going to be high touch. So I'm going to keep the group to just 10 or 15 people. So that one's probably going to fill up pretty fast. So if you're interested in that, we can talk about it and see if you want to reserve one of the slots. But again, that one's going to be after the new year. But I'm going to kind of loosely announce it to people I know before the new year. And then I'm going to make a more official announcement. Let's see. And then I see a couple questions. Let's see. Okay. So yeah, I get more interest in the insulin sensitivity question. Let's see, Ellen. Yeah, I do feel like coming to Hawaii is safe. I think Hawaiians are just more concerned about people showing up without coronavirus when you visit. So if you're coronavirus free or COVID-19 free and want to come to Hawaii, I do feel like it's a very safe place to be right now. We have very low rates of contagion and very low mortality. So, and suggestions on how to stay safe. Oh yeah, so in the airport, I mean, this may sound simple, but wear a mask and be careful about like touching your face a lot or whatever. The mask actually, one of the good things about the mask is it keeps you from touching your face as much. So yeah, just wear a mask. Hand sanitizer is really only an issue if you like get your hands in your mouth, or, you know, when you're touching food, anything that's going to go in your mouth. Again, it's not super likely it'll spread that way, but I really do feel like when you're traveling, just masks. Everything I'm seeing looks like if 2 people are wearing masks, it's really hard, like almost impossible to pass it. It's not impossible. And if you did pass any of it, it would be such a low inoculation. You might just get a de facto vaccine unless you have a very compromised immune system. If you have a very, very compromised immune system, you probably shouldn't travel. But if you're a reasonably healthy person, you know, just be careful in transit. I know that's not anything super novel, but I do feel like it's okay. All right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you do have to test. Just take the PCR test, not the rapid test, because the rapid test isn't accurate. Some airlines are letting people use that rapid test, and that scares me a little bit. So now I'm gonna open this up. Questions, maybe you could like raise your hand and unmute yourself. I'll just raise your hand, I'll call your name, you can unmute yourself. Anyone? Questions or comments? Yeah, Roger, go for it.
Hey, I just wanted to hear, first of all, I'll say you did a great job. It was a really interesting talk. Beyond that, I was wondering, are any of these workshops that you're talking about, are they going to be located in Hawaii?
They're going to be virtual, but you can still come.
Okay. Well, congratulations. That was a great talk. So, yeah, I'm very interested in any information you have on the insulin sensitivity.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a longer topic, but I will tell you, like the more processed carbohydrates you eat, you have to know what are carbohydrates. They're not bad. You just want to eat better ones. So the ones that are like fruits, roots, pumpkins, things like that are going to be lower glycemic. They're going to be, you know, better for you. Whereas the ones that are, you know, like, you know, flours and things like that are going to be higher glycemic. Of course, sugars, concentrated sugars are even higher glycemic. So you just kind of want to eat more of the good ones and less of the bad ones, or none of the bad ones, depending on your health. And also, like, just stuff you kind of know, like eat really good vegetables. And you have to know the right kinds of fats to eat, because you don't want to be on a low fat diet, but you also don't want to eat refined crappy vegetable oils. I'm not talking about olive oil. Olive oil is great. And yeah, and you just want to be the quality of the food you're eating. Also, stress changes, like causes chronic high insulin. Toxins, it could be perfumes, colognes, cleaning products, all kinds of things, pesticides, fertilizers, raise insulin levels. Stimulants, whether it's street drugs or coffee or chocolate, they depending on how stimulating they are, they raise insulin. So so let's see, stress, toxins, stimulants, and then things that just spike your blood sugar. That's the very short answer.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'll let other people ask their questions.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, what's up, Marty? I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, there it goes. Okay, go for it.
The PRC test, do you know the false negativity rate of that?
I don't know the exact statistic, because it's constantly fluctuating, and it's also hard to actually determine because you don't really know. So I don't know. All I know is that the PCR is way more accurate than the rapid test, but I don't know the exact statistic. And if anyone knows, you can type it in the chat, because I would be curious. But I know a lot of these numbers are really hard to get, because there's, for example, the percent positivity rate. Like, it turns out like a lot of places were, a lot of labs were only reporting positive tests, and they weren't reporting negative tests. So it was putting an artificial lean in the direction of positive tests. But then I forget what it was. There's some other way. Oh, like when the same person would get the test multiple times, that would lean the positivity rate more. It would make it falsely lower than it actually was. So statistics are right about 37% of the time. No, it's really hard to know. But if anyone knows, I'm open to hearing. Okay. Oh, and then Catherine talking about mask safety for the wearer. So, I mean, obviously every time you kind of move it around, you create a little gap, that kind of thing. I think if you're physically far enough away from people and your mask is a little imperfect, I don't actually think it's a big deal, especially if you have an immune system. I think like really having a really super tightly sealed mask and being very careful about your mask, that's going to be for people who are working in the medical environment or in COVID units. But it's really hard. I want people to still be cautious, but it's like, it's actually harder to spread this virus than we imagine in all our fear. So like my mom, can I share what happened with you? Okay, that was her saying sure. So she basically, you know, she has like, my mom has like 3 people in her like inner circle. And in the last month, 2 out of 3 of them got COVID. And they were in her house like the day before they became symptomatic. But they were in her house and they weren't wearing masks. And even one, like, you know, he was a pharmacist and he actually installed like a glucose monitor on her arm and he touched her and she still didn't get it. But she was not within 6 feet there's like this 15-minute rule people are saying, and it's not 100% accurate, but basically it seems like you need to stand within 6 feet of someone and talk for 15 minutes to actually pass the virus. And again, but now if someone sneezes on your face or coughs in your face, then they don't need 15 minutes, they need 1 minute, right? So as long as you're not coughing or sneezing into someone's face, which is rude, by the way, you know, like you're probably not going to give it to them. So as long as you back up, you're probably okay. And if you shorten conversations. Now, if someone comes up to you and starts talking to you and in an indoor environment and you're both not wearing masks, then you might want to put on a mask if you don't know how long the conversation is going to go. And at some level, at some point, you're also just consciously deciding to take risk. So anything else? Boys and girls? We all good? Yeah, Catherine, your daughter was wondering about store safety. I'm really not worried about the stores. That's a good question, Elnora. Hi. So I'm not worried about that. I think if we wear masks, we're fine. And honestly, I mean, some people could probably not wear masks and be fine, but I do understand the precaution. Like, I don't have an issue with wearing masks indoors and stuff. I don't want someone to tell me to wear a mask on the sidewalk or tell me I can't go where I want to go or drive my car when I want to drive. I don't want over social control because it freaks me out. It makes me feel like I'm in a dictatorship, but I really don't mind as a love offering wearing a mask in the grocery store, which I think is safe. Carol-Ann, do you have any questions or anyone else or comments or anything? Oh, Ina, I can't hear you.
There we go. Okay, so if you're in an office environment and you try to socially distance, so you're over 6 feet away, but you're with these people for 5 days a week, multiple weeks, is wearing a mask sufficient in that kind of like overexposure situation?
I do think it is.
Okay.
I think it's enough. And I think a lot of people don't really like wearing a mask for that long and that kind of, but yeah. I am reading stuff, and again, it's all risk assessment, right? Like, you could probably all not wear masks and maybe not get sick, but then you could, there could be an office outbreak. Like, it's a gamble. I think masks are effective. I think some of the statistics showing most people who are getting it regardless of if they're wearing a mask. I think it's because people are wearing masks in public, but then who got it from someone else in their inner circle. So
makes sense. Okay.
Tracy, I have a question. Do you think wearing a mask in the United States of America is an ideological thing or not?
Well, the mask thing has turned into like a politics thing, where it's like, I don't know, it's become politicized. I think there are people who actually don't mind wearing a mask, but they don't want to be forced to by the government because they want to feel like they have free will, which I completely understand. And then there are people who just don't want to wear it, period. There are people who believe they don't actually work. There are people, you know what I mean? What's it like in Spain? Is there this like fight over the mask in Spain, or what's the mask thing?
No, people are, I would say I compare this to cars because, in my field of sociology or sociolinguistics, my biggest intrigue is, do people who vote for this party here in America buy an American car or a foreign car? I don't have the answer yet. So in Spain, we're a little more advanced than that. People wear one because they don't want to die, period. No discussion, Yeah, no, it's a little bit different. It's just a very different mentality. No, that's not the issue there. It's just maybe with younger people who feel they are like immortal or something, but with everyone else who is not thinking of partying all the time, people wear one and they'll be on you within a second if you don't have it up your nose or something. Hey, what's up? Everybody wants to be dictatorial, everybody wants to have their little bit of power, Do
you mean in Spain or the United States?
No, in Spain. Over here, you see people going into stores, and I'm thinking, okay, somebody says something. What about that guy? Yeah. And nobody says anything. You guys are so polite,
Well, actually, it's funny because like I know someone who works in Whole Foods, and she yells at people if they don't wear a mask. And then I also have like, someone else like that he has a respiratory condition where he can't breathe when
Yeah.
he has like a doctor's note that he doesn't have to wear a mask. And then people yell at him all the time because they don't know his medical condition. So yeah.
That might also be, the political thing, because I think in a more so-called liberal environment, people feel more, relaxed about telling someone, okay, hey, you follow the rules. And in a more or less liberal, more, I don't know what to say, how to call it, more, I wouldn't say conservative necessarily, but more traditional or rural environment, then people, okay, well, I know what you're thinking what I'm thinking, but no one's going to say anything. So it really gets that deep into society, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There's been such a huge overlap of politics into this whole.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any, because this is about life and death. I mean, it's just, I don't see the point. But anyway, people, I think, overextend themselves into thinking that it's related,
Yeah. Yes, Mark, I hear you.
Do you have any perspective on schools?
That is such a complicated one. That one is so complicated because on one hand, they're showing like countries in Europe where they kept schools open but closed down bars or whatever, that they're having lower infection rates and people close those schools and open up bars. But then, and I also do think it's having a negative effect on kids to get out of school. But then if you live with your grandma or something and you go get it and then you bring it home and you're asymptomatic and you kill your grandma, then what, And it's easy, it's hard when you look at statistics, then the outliers don't feel like real people. But when that real person is your mom or your grandma or your sister or whatever, someone you love, then that's just 100% your world, right? So yeah, I don't have an easy answer on the schools. I think places that have very low infection rates, very low spread rates, I think schools should be open. And I think places that are just spiking like crazy, it's probably not a good idea. What do you think?
Oh, let's see. The same. I think the research that I'm hearing is that it's spreading, in middle school and high school students more than elementary school students, which makes sense to me. But my sister teaches in a pre-K through 12 school. It's a private school, so they're able to lower sizes and then monitor them. So teenagers have no time unsupervised. And they can be distanced all the time, and they've had no community spread in their school. So, I think it depends. I was just wondering if maybe.
I think they have to go by school and by district, and I don't think there's one answer for everybody because we're not a homogenous country.
Yeah. It's just tough watching these kids online kindergarten. I think it sucks.
Online kindergarten, it's so weird.
Yeah, it's not good.
Mom, do you have anything you want to say or add?
One of the things we're combating is we're in a one-size-fits-all society, and it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And what works in Hawaii may not work in Texas.
Yeah. I
think people need to realize that and quit trying to put us all in one container.
Yeah.
Because it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm being very careful. I've got all my supplements all lined up over here and ready to swing into action. If people would just quit bringing it into my house, I'll be okay.
In your house, minding your own business, and had 2 people bring it in. But
2 out of 3.
They took it with them. So
yeah.
I'm so glad you didn't get it. I was hoping she actually had the antibodies though, and she tested negative for the antibodies. So I was disappointed in that, but I'm so glad she doesn't have COVID. So.
And I had the PCR test twice. I'm going to have it again at the end of next week to make absolutely sure.
Yeah.
Well, as absolutely as it gets.
Then before anyone comes back into your house, they're getting 3 tests. Yeah. Okie dokie. Well, thank you guys. It's good to see you. And remember, coronavirus or no coronavirus, take really, really good care of yourself, right? And I'll see you next time.